In the shadow of a golden throne, a secret carved in blood and bone, identity stolen before I could speak, a kingly face for a life so bleak. They must be down to the river's edge, behind the stone and the ivy hedge. A velvet room turns to cold gray bars, while my twin brother counted all the stars. I heard the heavy sound of the hammer strike, occasional steel for the soul alike.
All right, everyone. First off, I hope you like the music that I made for this one. Also, I know you're probably wondering why Man in the Iron Mask, you just did that. No, we did the facts that we could dig up and the stuff that was the unknowns. This is the story as told by Alexander Dumas. Okay? We're going to go ahead and get started. I don't want to hold up too much. I'm going to try and condense this into half-hour episodes so it's not too much for you guys as well. Now, The Man in the Iron Mask, Chapter 1. 3 guests astonished to find themselves at supper together. A carriage arrived at the outside gate of the Bastille. A soldier on guard stopped it, but D'Artagnan had only to utter a single word to procure admittance, and the carriage passed on. While they were proceeding along the covered way which led to the courtyard of the governor's residence, D'Artagnan, whose lynx eye saw everything, even through the walls, suddenly cried out, "What is that out yonder?" "Well," said Athos, quietly, "what is it?" "Look yonder, Athos, in the courtyard." Yes, make haste." "Well, a carriage, very likely, conveying a prisoner like myself. That would be to droll. I do not understand you. Make haste and look again, and look at the man who is just getting out of that carriage." At that very moment, a second sentinel stopped D'Artagnan, and while the formalities were gone through, Athos could see at 100 paces from him the man whom his friend had pointed out to him. He was, in fact, getting out of the carriage at the door of the governor's house. "Well," inquired D'Artagnan, "do you see him?" "Yes, he is a man in a gray suit." "What do you say of him?" "I cannot very well tell. He is, as I have just now told you, a man in a gray suit, who is getting out of a carriage. That is all." "Athos, I will wager anything it is he." "He who? Aramis? Aramis arrested?" "Impossible." I do not say he is arrested, since we see him alone in his carriage." "Well then, what is he doing here?" "Oh, he knows Baisemieux, the governor," replied the musketeer, slyly. "My faith, we have arrived just in time." "What for?" "In order to see what we can see. I regret this meeting exceedingly. When Aramis sees me, he will be very much annoyed. In the first place, at seeing me, and in the next, at being seen." Very well reasoned. Unfortunately, there is no remedy for it. Whenever anyone meets another in the Bastille, even if he wished to draw back to avoid him, it would be impossible. Athos, I have an idea. The question is to spare Aramis the annoyance you were speaking of, is it not? What is to be done? I will tell you, or in order better to explain myself, let me relate the affair in my own manner. I will not recommend you to tell a falsehood, for that would be impossible for you to do. Well, what is it? Well, I will lie for both of us. It is so easy to do that, with the nature and habits of a Gascon. Athos smiled. The carriage stopped where the one we have just now pointed out had stopped, namely at the door of the governor's house. "It is understood, then," said D'Artagnan in a low voice to his friend. Athos consented by a gesture, and they ascended the staircase. There will be no occasion for surprise at the facility with which they had entered into the Bastille, if it be understood that before passing the first gate, in fact, the most difficult of all, D'Artagnan had announced that he had brought a prisoner of state. At the third gate, on the contrary, this is to say, when he had once fairly entered the prison, He merely said to the sentinel, "To M. Basamiu," and they both passed on. In a few minutes, they were in the governor's dining room, and the first face which attracted D'Artagnan's observation was that of Aramis, who was seated side by side with Basamiu and awaited the announcement of a good meal, whose odor impregnated the whole apartment. If D'Artagnan pretended surprise, Aramis did not pretend at all. He started when he saw his two friends, and his emotion was very apparent. Athos and D'Artagnan, however, made their salutations, and Basamiu, amazed, completely stupefied by the presence of those three guests, began to perform a few evolutions around them. "Ah, there," said Aramis. "By what chance?" "We were just going to ask you," retorted D'Artagnan. "Are we going to give ourselves up as prisoners?" cried Aramis, with an affection of hilarity. "Ah, ha, ha," said D'Artagnan. "It is true the walls smell deucedly like a prison. M. de Basamiu, you know you invited me to sup with you the other day." "Aye," cried Basamiu. "Ah, one would say you had fallen from the clouds. You have no recollection of it." Basamiu turned pale and then red, looked at Aramis, who looked at him, and finally stammered, "Certainly, I am delighted, but upon my honor, I have not the slightest, I have such a wretched memory." "Well, I am wrong, I see," said D'Artagnan, as if he were offended. "Wrong how?" "Wrong to remember, it seems." Basamiu hurried towards him. "Do not stand on ceremony, my dear captain," he said. "I have the poorest head in the kingdom. Take me from my pigeons and their pigeon house, and I am no better than the rawest recruit." "At all events, you remember it now," said D'Artagnan boldly. "Yes, yes," replied the governor, hesitating. "I think I remember. It was when you came to the palace to see me. You told me some story or other about your accounts with M. de Levis and M. Le Tremblay. Oh, yes, perfectly. And about M. de Herblay's kindness to you." "Ah," exclaimed Aramis, looking the unhappy governor full in the face, "and yet you just now said you had no memory, M. de Basamiu." Basamiu interrupted the musketeer in the midst of his revelations. "Yes, yes, you're quite right. It seems to me that I am still there. I beg 1,000 pardons, but now, once for all, my dear D'Artagnan, be sure that at this present time, as at any other, whether invited or not, you are master here. You and D'Herblay, your friend," he said, turning toward Aramis, "and this gentleman, too," he added, bowing to Athos. "Well, I thought it would be sure to turn out so," replied D'Artagnan. "This is the occasion of my coming. Having nothing to do this evening at the Palais Royal, I wished to judge for myself what your ordinary style of living was like. And as I was coming along, I met Monsieur the Count." Athos bowed. "The Count, who had just left His Majesty, handed me an order which required immediate attention. We were close by here. I wished to call in, even if it were for no other object than that of shaking hands with you and of presenting the Count to you, of whom you spoke so highly in the king's presence that very evening when—" "Certainly, certainly. Le Comte de la Fère, is it not?" "Precisely. Monsieur the Count is welcome, and he will sup with you too, I suppose, while I, unfortunate dog that I am, must run off on a matter of duty. Oh, what happy beings you are, compared to myself," D'Artagnan added, sighing as loud as Porthos might have done. "And so you are going away," said Aramis and Basamiu together, with the same expression of delighted surprise, the tone of which was immediately noticed by D'Artagnan. "I leave you in my place," he said, "a noble and excellent guest, and he touched Athos gently on the shoulder, who, astonished also, could not help exhibiting his surprise a little, which was noticed by Aramis only, for Baisemeaux was not quite equal to the three friends in point of intelligence. "What? Are you going to leave us?" resumed the governor. "I shall be away only about an hour or an hour and a half. I will return in time for dessert." "Oh, we will wait for you," said Baisemeaux. "No, no, that would be really disobliging me." "You will be sure to return, though," said Athos, with an expression of doubt. "Most certainly," he said, pressing his friend's hand confidently, and he added in a low voice, "Wait for me, Athos. Be cheerful and lively as possible, and above all, don't allude to business affairs, for heaven's sake." And a renewed pressure of the hand impressed upon the count of the necessity of being discreet and impenetrable. Baisemeaux led D'Artagnan to the gate. Aramis, with many friendly protestations of delight, sat down by Athos, determined to make him speak. But Athos possessed all the virtues in their highest excellence. If necessity had required it, he would have been the finest orator in the world. But when there was need of silence, he would die rather than utter a syllable. 10 minutes after D'Artagnan's departure, the three gentlemen sat down to a table, which was covered with the most substantial display of gastronomic luxury. Large joints, exquisite dishes, preserves, the greatest variety of wines, appeared successively upon the table, which was served at the king's expense, and of which expense Colbert would have no difficulty in saving 2/3, without any one in the Bastille being the worse for it. Aramis was incessantly asking himself by what extraordinary chance Athos was at Baisemeaux's when D'Artagnan was no longer there, and why D'Artagnan did not remain when Athos was there. Athos sounded all the depths of the mind of Aramis, who lived in the midst of subterfuge, evasion, and intrigue. He studied his man well and thoroughly, and felt convinced that he was engaged upon some important project. And then he too began to think of his own personal affair, and to lose himself in conjectures as to D'Artagnan's reason for having left the Bastille so abruptly, and for leaving behind him a prisoner so badly introduced and so badly looked after by the prison authorities. But we shall not pause to examine into the thoughts and feelings of these personages. We will leave them to themselves, surrounded by the remains of poultry, game, and fish, and mutilated by the generous knife of Baisemeaux. We are going to follow D'Artagnan instead, who, getting into the carriage which had brought him, cried out to the coachman, "To the king!" and burned the pavement. All right, Chapter 2. What took place at the Louvre during the supper at the Bastille. Now, de Saint-Aignan, the courtier had executed the commission with which the king had entrusted him for his favorite Lavalier. But whatever his eloquence might have been, he did not succeed in persuading the young girl that she had in the king a protector powerful enough for her under any combination of circumstances, and that she had no need of anyone else in the world when the king was on her side. In point of fact, at the very first word, Louise, in a passion of tears, abandoned herself in utter despair to a sorrow which would have been far from flattering for the king, if he had been a witness of it from a corner of the room. Now, de Saint-Aignan, in his character of ambassador, felt greatly offended at it, as his master himself would have been, and returned to announce to the king what he had seen and heard. It is there that we now find him in a state of great agitation, in the presence of the king, still more agitated than he. "But," said the king to the courtier, when the latter had finished his report, "what did she decide to do? Shall I at least see her presently before supper? Will she come to me, or shall I be obliged to go to her room? I believe, sire, that if your majesty wishes to see her, you will not only have to take the first step in advance, but will have to go the whole way. Nothing for me. Hold on a second here. Nothing for me. Does the bride alone still possess her heart? Muttered the king between his teeth. Oh, sire, that is not possible. For it is you alone from whom Mademoiselle de la Valliere loves, and that too with all her heart. But you know that de Bragelonne belongs to that proud race who play the part of Roman heroes. The king smiled feebly. He knew how true the illustration was, for Athos had just left him. As for Mademoiselle de la Valliere, de Saint-Aignan continued, she was brought up under the care of the dowager Madame, that is to say, in austere retirement. This engaged young couple coldly exchanged their little vows in the presence of the moon and the stars, and now, when they find they have to break those vows, it plays the very deuce with them. De Saint-Aignan thought he should have made the king laugh, but on the contrary, from a mere smile, Louis passed to the greatest seriousness of manner. He already began to experience a remorse which the count had promised D'Artagnan he would inflict upon him. He reflected that, in fact, these young persons who loved and sworn fidelity to each other, that one of the two had kept his word, and that the other was too conscientious not to feel her perjury most bitterly, and with remorse. Jealousy sharply pricked the king's heart. He did not say another word, and instead of going to pay a visit to his mother or the queen or Madame, in order to amuse himself a little and make the ladies laugh, as he himself used to say, he threw himself into the huge armchair in which his august father, Louis XIII, had passed so many weary days and years in company with Baradas and Cinq-Mars. De Saint-Aignan perceived that the king was not to be amused at that moment. He tried at last resource and pronounced Louise's name, which made the king look up immediately. What does your majesty intend to do this evening? Shall Mademoiselle de la Valliere be informed of your intention to see her? It seems she is already aware of that, replied the king. No, Saint-Aignan, he continued after a moment's pause. We will both of us pass our time in dreaming. When Mademoiselle de la Valliere shall have sufficiently regretted what she now regrets, she will deign, perhaps, to give us some news of herself. Ah, sire, is it possible you can so misunderstand that devoted heart? The king rose, flushed with vexation. He was a prey to jealousy in its turn. De Saint-Aignan was just beginning to feel that his position was becoming awkward. When the curtain before the door was raised, the king turned hastily round. His first idea was that a letter from Louise had arrived, but instead of a letter of love, he saw only his captain of musketeers standing upright and silent in the doorway. D'Artagnan, he said. Ah, well, monsieur. D'Artagnan looked at de Saint-Aignan. Louise's eyes took the same direction as those of his captain. These looks would have been clear to anyone, and they were especially so to de Saint-Aignan. The courtier bowed and quitted the room, leaving the king and D'Artagnan alone. Is it done? Inquired the king. Yes, sire, replied the captain of the musketeers in a grave voice. It is done. The king was unable to say another word. Pride, however, obliged him not to pause there. Whenever a sovereign has adopted a decisive course, even though it be unjust, he is compelled to prove to all witnesses, and particularly to himself, that he was quite right in so adopting it. A good means for effecting that, an almost infallible means, indeed, is to try to prove his victim to be in the wrong. Louis, brought up by Mazarin and Anne of Austria, knew better than anyone else his vocation as a monarch. He therefore endeavored to prove it on the present occasion. After a few moments' pause, which he had employed in making silently to himself the same reflections which we have just expressed aloud, he said in an indifferent tone, "What did the Count say?" "Nothing at all, sire." "Surely he did not allow himself to be arrested without saying something?" "He said he expected to be arrested, sire." The king raised his head haughtily. "I presume," he said, "that Le Comte de la Fere has not continued to play his obstinate and rebellious part. In the first place, sire, what do you term rebellious?" quietly asked the musketeer. "Is that man a rebel in the eyes of the king, who not only allows himself to be shut up in the Bastille, but who even opposes those who do not wish to take him there? Who do not wish to take him there?" exclaimed the king. "What do you say, captain? Are you mad?" "I believe not, sire." "You speak of persons who did not wish to arrest de la Fere." "Yes, sire." "And who are they?" "Those whom your majesty entrusted with that duty, apparently." "But it is you whom I entrusted with it," exclaimed the king. "Yes, sire, it is I." "And you say that despite my orders, you had the intention of not arresting the man who had insulted me?" "Yes, sire, that was really my intention. I even proposed to the count to mount a horse that I had prepared for him at the Barriere de la Conference. And what was your object in getting this horse ready?" "Why, sire, in order that Le Comte de la Fere might be able to reach Havre, and from that place make his escape to England." "You betrayed me then, monsieur," cried the king, kindling with a wild pride. "Exactly so." There was nothing to say in answer to statements made in such a tone. The king was astounded at such an obstinate and open resistance on the part of D'Artagnan. "At least you had a reason, D'Artagnan, for acting as you did," said the king proudly. "I have always a reason, sire. Your reason cannot be your friendship for the count, at all events. The only one that can be of any avail, the only one that could possibly excuse you, for I placed you entirely at your ease in that respect." "Me, sire? Did I not give you the choice to arrest or not to arrest Le Comte de la Fere?" "Yes, sire." But what?" exclaimed the king impatiently. "But you warned me, sire, that if I did not arrest him, your captain of the guards should do so. Was I not considerate enough towards you when I did not compel you to obey me?" "To me, sire, you were, but not to my friend, for my friend would be arrested all the same, whether by myself or by the captain of the guards. And this is your devotion, monsieur, a devotion which argues and reasons. You are no soldier, monsieur. I wait for your majesty to tell me what I am." "Well, then, you are a Frondier, and since there is no longer any Fronde, sire, in that case, but if what you say is true—" "What I say is always true, sire." "What have you come to say to me, monsieur?" "I have come to say to your majesty, sire, de la Fere is in the Bastille, That is not your fault, it would seem. That is true, sire. But at all events, he is there. And since he is there, it is important that your majesty should know it. Ah, D'Artagnan, so you set your king at defiance. Sire, D'Artagnan, I warn you that you are abusing my patience. On the contrary, sire. What do you mean by on the contrary? I have come to get myself arrested too. To get yourself arrested? You? Of course. My friend will be lonely down there, and I have come to propose to your majesty to permit me to bear him company. If your majesty will but give the word, I will arrest myself. I shall not need the captain of the guards for that, I assure you. The king darted towards the table and seized a pen to write the order for D'Artagnan's imprisonment. Pay attention, monsieur, that this is forever, cried the king, in a tone of stern menace. I can quite believe that, returned the musketeer, for when you have once done such an act as that, you will never be able to look me in the face again. The king dashed down his pen violently. Leave the room, monsieur, he said. Oh, not so, sire. If it please your majesty, how not so? Sire, I came to speak temperately to your majesty. Your majesty got into a passion with me. That is a misfortune. But I shall not the less, on that account, say what I had to say to you. Your resignation, monsieur. Your resignation, cried the king. Sire, you know whether I care about my resignation or not, since at Blois, on the day when you refused King Charles the million which my friend the Comte de la Fère gave him, I tendered my resignation to your majesty. Very well, then, do it at once. No, sire, for there is no question for my resignation at the present moment. Your majesty took up your pen just now to send me to the Bastille. Why should you change your intention? D'Artagnan, Gascon that you are, who is the king? Allow me to ask, are you or myself? You, sire, unfortunately. What do you mean by unfortunately? Yes, sire, for if it were you, you would approve of D'Artagnan's rebellious conduct, I suppose. Certainly. Really? Said the king, shrugging his shoulders. And I should tell my captain of the musketeers, continued D'Artagnan. I should tell him, looking at him all the while with human eyes and not with eyes like coals of fire. D'Artagnan, I have forgotten that I am king. I have descended from my throne to insult a gentleman. Monsieur, cried the king, do you think you can excuse your friend by exceeding him in insolence? Oh, sire, I shall go much further than he did, said D'Artagnan, and it will be your own fault. I shall tell you what he, a man full of delicacy, did not tell you. I shall say, sire, you sacrificed his son, and he defended his son. You sacrificed him. He addressed you in the name of honor, of religion, of virtue. You repulsed, pursued, and imprisoned him. I shall be harder than he was, for I shall say to you, sire, choose. Do you wish to have friends or lackeys, soldiers or slaves, great men or puppets? Do you wish men to serve you or to crouch before you? Do you wish men to love you or to fear you? If you prefer baseness, intrigue, cowardice, oh, say it, sire, we will leave you. We, who are the only surviving illustrations, nay, I will say more, the only models of the valor of former times. We who have done our duty and have exceeded, perhaps in courage and in merit, the men already great for prosperity. Choose, sire, and without delay. Whatever remains to you of the grand nobility, guard it with a jealous eye. Of courtiers, you will always have enough. Delay not, and send me to the Bastille with my friend. For if you have not known how to listen to the Comte de la Fère, that is to say, to the most sweet and noble voice. That is to say, to the most sweet and noble voice of honor. If you do not know how to listen to D'Artagnan, that is to say, to the most candid and rough voice of sincerity, you are a bad king, and tomorrow will be a poor king. Now, bad kings are hated. Poor kings are driven away. That is what I had to say to you, sire. You are wrong to have driven me to it. The king threw himself back in his chair, cold and livid. Had a thunderbolt fallen at his feet, he could not have been more astonished. He appeared as if his respiration had ceased, and as if he were at the point of death. That rough voice of sincerity, as D'Artagnan had called it, had pierced through his heart like a sword blade. D'Artagnan had said all that he had to say. Comprehending the king's anger, he drew his sword, and approaching Louis XIV, respectfully placed it on the table. But the king, with a furious gesture, thrust aside the sword, which fell on the ground and rolled to D'Artagnan's feet. Notwithstanding his mastery over himself, D'Artagnan, too, in his turn, became pale and trembled with indignation. A king, he said, may disgrace a soldier. He may exile him, and may even condemn him to death. But were he 100 times a king, he has no right to insult him by casting dishonor on his sword. Sire, a king of France has never repulsed with contempt the sword of a man such as I am. Stained with disgrace as this sword now is, it has henceforth no other sheath than either your heart or my own. I choose my own, sire. Give thanks for it to God and my patience. Then snatching up his sword, he cried, My blood be upon your head. And with a rapid gesture, he placed the hilt upon the floor and directed the point of the blade towards his breast. The king, however, with a movement still more rapid than that of D'Artagnan, threw his right arm around the musketeer's neck, and with his left hand seized hold of the blade by the middle and returned it silently to the scabbard. D'Artagnan, upright, pale, and still trembling, suffered the king to do all, without aiding him, to the very end. Then Louis, overcome, returned to the table, took a pen, wrote a few lines, signed them, and offered the paper to D'Artagnan. What is this paper, sire? Inquired the captain. An order for D'Artagnan to set the Comte de la Fère at liberty immediately. D'Artagnan seized the king's hand and kissed it. He then folded the order, placed it in his belt, and quitted the room. Neither the king nor the captain spoke a word. "O human heart, director of kings," murmured Louis when alone. "When shall I learn to read in your recesses, as in the leaves of a book? No, I am not a bad king, nor am I a poor king, but I am still a child."